welcome back to our video series, My Sewing Lessons. In this series, we will show you the ABCs of making clothes step by step to get you started in the world of sewing. Today, we are making a classic piece. The midi skirt looks fabulous and can be combined with any number of tops. Plus, you can make it in only a few steps. This lesson will give you a practice in handling very large pattern pieces. We will also show you how to add an elastic waistband and create volume with fabric. We are making the model with the Burda B35, which is ideal to use for beginner sewing projects. For the skirt, we have chosen a lovely lyocell fabric from C Poly, which is sustainable and feels great. Here again, we recommend that you wash the fabric before working with it to prevent any unpleasant surprises after the first wash. For this project, you need thread in the color that matches your fabric, a wide elastic waistband, tailor's chalk, sewing machine needles, a set square, a tape measure, straight pins, fabric scissors, a piece of thread, paper scissors, a seam gauge, a tracing wheel, tracing paper, and an iron. First, find the Burda size that matches your measurements. For this skirt, you need your waist and hip measurements. Now note your measurements in the size chart on page 12. You can also refresh what you've learned about taking measurements properly. After determining your size, find your pattern piece again, the template that you will pin to the fabric. You will find this on sheet 2. Each size has its special outline. First, look for the correct size line. Next, highlight the outline for your size using a colored marker. This makes it easier to cut out the pattern pieces. Now you can cut out the pattern piece along the marked outline using your paper scissors. In the next step, you will prepare the fabric. Place the fabric flat on the table and fold it in half lengthwise. When you fold the fabric in half, this creates a fold opposite the open side. You will see how to place the pattern piece on the fabric in the cutting layout in the instructions. On the pattern piece, you will find an edge that is labeled Fold. This is the edge of the pattern piece that you place in the fabric fold and pin in place using a few straight pins. You will also need a seam and hem allowances to make the skirt. The paper pattern piece is only as wide as the finished skirt. As you need some extra fabric for neatening the edges after you stitch, you must now draw an allowance directly on the fabric. To do so, place a set square on the edge opposite the fold and use the chalk to draw a parallel line on the fabric 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch away from the edge of the paper pattern. This will later be the center back. For the top edge of your skirt, draw an allowance of 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch on one of the shorter sides. This is where you will attach the waistband later. Now draw a parallel line along the opposite edge 3 centimeters or 1 1/4 inch away from the edge. This will be the hem of your skirt. Use your fabric scissors to cut out the pattern pieces along the chalk line. To help you to remember exactly where to stitch later, mark the seam line on the wrong side of the fabric. To do so, place a piece of soft fabric on the table and spread out the tracing paper with the coated or colored side facing up. Place the pattern piece on it and roll your tracing wheel around the paper pattern using light pressure. This will press the color of the coating onto the fabric. Now remove the pattern piece and pin the 2 layers of fabric together. Flip the pattern piece and roll along the first line to mark the other side as well. You will find detailed instructions in the tracing paper packaging. You are now finished with the preparations. It's time to start sewing. Begin stitching with the center back seam. Place the edges opposite the fold, the selvages, together and make sure that the right side of the fabric is touching. Insert the pins through both layers of fabric and, for the best results, add a 90-degree angle to the selvages. Later, you can simply stitch across the pins. Now you can prepare your sewing machine. To find out how to thread the machine and insert the needle, consult your sewing machine manual. Set a straight stitch and first make 3 to 4 back stitches to prevent the seam from opening. Now stitch along the marked seam line and secure the end of the seam with 3 or 4 back stitches. To prevent the edges from fraying, you can neaten them with a zigzag stitch. You'll see that the seam allowances are on top of each other, neaten them together. Stitch along the edge and make sure that the needle is always inserted right next to the edge. You can carefully trim the excess fabric at the edges, but be careful not to cut into the seam. Press the neatened seam to one side. Now use a zigzag stitch to neaten the top and bottom edges. Mark the center front and the 2 sides on the upper skirt piece using straight pins. To do so, fold the skirt along the seam and insert a pin opposite the fold. Open the skirt up again and place it so that the pin meets the seam. Insert a straight pin on each side of the fold. As the skirt must be slightly gathered at the top, you need to make 2 lines of stitching along the top edge. To create the proper width, push the fabric along the stitching like it were a curtain. To make the lines of stitching, set a stitch length of 4 mm or 1/4 of an inch on your sewing machine. Start at one pin on one side and stitch to the other pin. Stitch 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch away from the edge. As you will later pull on the bobbin threads, leave at least 10 cm or 4 inches hanging at each end. Stitch the second half exactly the same way. Now make a second line of stitching 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch away from the first seam and leave the threads long. Use the lines of stitching to gather the top edge until it is the same width as your hips. Consult the size chart on page 12 to determine the hip measurement for your Burda size. At the front and back, gather each piece of the skirt to half the measurement. This is why you're instructed to divide your hip measurement by 2. Secure the tape measure on the table. Now you can easily put the marked section along the tape measure. Hold the bobbin threads and push the fabric to the center. Knot the thread ends and distribute the width evenly. Now prepare the elastic waistband. First, cut the elastic waistband to the length indicated for your size. Now fold the elastic waistband in half and place the 2 ends on top of each other. Pin them and stitch them 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch away from the edge. Secure the seam beginning and end with back stitches. Use straight pins here to mark the center and sides on the elastic waistband like you did with the skirt piece. Now pin the elastic waistband to the skirt piece. Make sure that the marked sides and the center match. For this step, flip the skirt and the elastic waistband so that the right side is on the outside. Begin at the seam and pin the elastic waistband to the right side of the skirt piece. The bottom edge of the elastic waistband will be exactly 1.5 cm or 5/8 of an inch on the skirt piece, and both seams will match. Pin the marked sides in the center of the elastic waistband to each of the matching straight pins on the skirt piece. Now stitch the elastic waistband onto the skirt piece using flat zigzag stitches. Start at the seam, hold the elastic waistband tightly in front of and behind the needle, and stretch it until it is the same width as the first straight pin. Stitch along the edge, making sure you only stretch the elastic waistband and not the skirt piece. To finish, make a few stitches on top of the beginning. Because we only used the bobbin threads to gather, remove them now or they'll be visible from the outside. Now you are almost finished, you only have to sew the hem. Fold and press the bottom skirt edge 3 cm or 1 1/4 inch to the inside along the marked hem line. Insert a few straight pins all around to keep the fabric layers in place when stitching. Hems are typically stitched from the outside, the right side. To achieve a nice, neat seam, you can attach a piece of tape to the throat plate 2.5 cm or 1 inch away from the needle as a guide. Now stitch all around the hem edge and secure the seam ends by continuing to stitch on top of the seam beginning for a few stitches. And now your new skirt is finished! While making it, you learned how to attach an elastic waistband and put volume into large, somewhat cumbersome fabric pieces by gathering. We are advancing step by step. You will find your next lesson in the video for a dress. Until then, have fun practicing!